Human beings are searching for the personal experience of reality. They are seeking to come to understand themselves, to find a reason for their own existence.
And so you go round and round and round, ever chasing the illusion that there is something outside yourself, outside your here and now, to be attained that will make things better.
No guru, no method, no teacher, and no nothing else either.
Welcome, fellow Phoenixes. It's common in our culture to have compassion for those who are exposed to individual instances of incredibly impactful trauma. However, oftentimes we tend to overlook what occurs more frequently, the persistent, pervasive, powerfully poisonous effects of what I would deem microtrauma. It slowly seeps into our souls and erodes our emotional stability drop by drop until we find a vast chasm at our core. Today I'm here to talk about persistent compound microtrauma and how we can use this to our advantage. Okay, so right now I'd just like to take a moment and focus on what we are grateful for today. Today, I am grateful for all the instances that broke me down so I could build myself back up, essentially. Before I get into the quotes that I have, there's only one link in the description below, and it'll take you to all my other links. I would appreciate if you could leave a review for this podcast. I will read it at the beginning of the podcast, probably in this space here. Or if you would like to support this podcast, just buy a tarot card reading, buy something from my store. I'm not going to ask you to do Patreon. I don't like that pay model. I'm not going to put content behind a paywall. I don't really have time to create more than I am already. And with that, I'll get into these quotes. Sometimes a breakdown can be the beginning of a kind of breakthrough, a way of living in advance through a trauma that prepares you for a future of radical transformation. And that was said by Cherrie Moraga. Someone who has experienced trauma also has a gift to offer all of us. In their depth, their knowledge of our universal vulnerability, and their experience of the power of compassion. And that was said by Sharon Salzberg. Trauma has been one of my greatest teachers. And that was said by me. So let me get into what this is. Persistent compound microtrauma, or let's just say PCMT, is essentially like these little instances throughout our life that maybe aren't necessarily incredibly traumatic individually, but over time they become like this really big force. And the reason that I put compound too is because they build upon each other. So like just an example is, I don't even want to find a specific example. You can think of individual instances like this in your own life, I'm sure. But there's this one instance kind of changes your behavior because that instance hurt and made you feel bad. So you change your behavior a little bit. Another instance occurs, you change it more. And it's almost like people will train a tree to grow or something like that. And they have it tied down so it grows, and they can like keep changing it slowly till eventually its growth is changed. Like it could have bounced back, but because of the persistence of these instances, it makes it difficult to. And I think that one of the difficult things about PCMT is the fact that to the outside observer, it doesn't really make a lot of sense as to why this person is responding in that way. When somebody has like a big traumatic event, it's a lot more easily understood by the outside that's clued into what has happened in their life to understand the coping mechanisms, the why, and all of this kind of stuff. And I'll say this too, like if you're working with a therapist or a trained professional, I'm fairly certain that they understand persistent compound microtrauma. They probably even have a term for it. I know that there's CPTSD, which is complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and I'm not saying that these are the same things. I'm not certain. But when you're dealing with the public overall, oftentimes there's this insensitivity towards people's emotional reactions and like the concept of being triggered by something. And they look at it in the individual instance of why this was like triggering or why someone was upset by it. But they don't look back on someone's totality of life experience and see how this is like another nuance of this difficult occurrence that came up. So it's like one of the issues that I have struggled with, and it's something that still comes up at times because I haven't dealt with every nuanced instance of this, is feeling like I'm not being respected, or like my opinion isn't being respected. And I can trace that back to childhood overall, of being ignored when I'm talking about things, being consistently told that I was wrong, even when facts and observations pointed to the contrary. And it still comes up today, like when I have a different opinion with somebody, they've said their opinion, I've said my opinion, and I'm ready to move past that point of conversation because I'm okay with letting people think what they want to think. But people are trying to convince me of the correctness of their assumption, or that they have the only way. That creates a lot of tension and uncomfortableness for me. And I actually heard this study that like certain things that occur in our life, like emotional pain, can actually represent as physical pain. And I was wondering like why I was getting like these deep headaches in some ways, and it's because in those instances the way that my brain wired itself, it's like short-circuiting my brain because it doesn't make sense to me. But anyhow, back onto this compound persistent microtrauma. I'm gonna go through this concept and like get to the healing of it. So we've talked about like what my concept of what it is, how it can occur, like an instance of it. I'm sure you can find your own if you really dig deep enough. And like in the intro part, it said it slowly seeps into our souls and erodes our emotional stability drop by drop until we find a vast chasm at our core. And I'd say how we can use this experience to our advantage. So look, if I have this big chasm at my core, first of all, anything that's been eroded over a long period of time has substantial beauty to it. But also it creates a vessel to where things can be filled up. And that's been one of my greatest advantages. There's this concept in Japanese culture, and I can't remember the word for it, but when something is broken, they fill the cracks with gold and piece it back together, and it actually creates more value to it. So if we have this deep chasm and this emptiness within, we actually are granted the opportunity to fill it with something better than we would have started with. And that has been my experience with like my whole history with mental health and substance abuse and all this kind of stuff. Is like I started out empty, broken, shattered. And in the past 18 months, I've really, through a lot of effort, suffering, introspection, mistakes, all these kind of things, I've really been able to begin, I'm not even going to say that I'm completely full, but begin to fill that up with something more valuable than I would have started with. And that is like this connection to a spiritual source. It is this ability to share my experiences and connect with people on a deep level. and potentially offer healing. Like even in being able to talk about what I'm going through, like the concept of persistent compound microtrauma, that's a gift to me in lots of ways. Now I want to get into the quotes real quick. Sometimes a breakdown can be the beginning of a kind of breakthrough, a way of living in advance through a trauma that prepares you for a future of radical transformation. So look, let's just say you've had all this persistent microtrauma. Things are falling down around you. It is the benefit of being able to build a sturdier foundation, really evaluate all the pieces of your structure so you can build something more meaningful, more powerful. Being able to, like in Native American culture, sometimes they would burn things so new things could grow, like burn a field down. That's kind of what we're talking about here, like that concept of being so broken that all you have to do is build or let things stay shattered. The next quote is, someone has experienced trauma, who has experienced trauma, also has gifts to offer all of us. In their depth, their knowledge of our universal vulnerability, and their experience of the power of compassion. So what it's saying is, if you've experienced this persistent compound microtrauma, like all these little instances, there's a gift in the fact that you can connect with other people, which is like what I'm trying to say here with everything is, I know that a lot of us have suffered lots of these little micro traumas throughout our life, and we still seek out these experiences because that's what we feel that we are worthy of. And part of raising awareness of this is to say, we can change it, we can get over this, we can use these experiences to grow. And then it talks about our depth. People that experience this do have a lot of depth because we were hurt on such a deep level over a small time. These little instances of trauma took us down to a deeper level. And that depth is how we can show our compassion. Like, I understand how much, like, the feeling of consistently feeling like you're less than, consistently feeling like you're worthless, consistently feeling like you're not doing enough. I know how much that impacts me. I know what that feels like, and I can share that with other people. Their knowledge of our universal vulnerability. That's what my whole podcast largely is about, is vulnerability about the things inside of me that most people don't want to talk about. A lot of people don't want to talk about all the uncomfortable stuff that they go through. They don't want to talk about the uncomfortableness of their emotions. They don't want to talk about how uncomfortable growth can be, some of the things that are hindering their growth. Our culture has this concept of portraying ourselves as perfect, whole, all-knowing, sentient beings that are functioning at our best. And while I will say that we're all functioning at our best, otherwise why wouldn't we be doing better? When we begin to process a lot of the things that are holding us back, we can remove blocks that allow us to function better. Just like if there's a machine and it operates okay, but you do an oil change and it operates more smoothly, that's largely what we're talking about here. And finally, my quote, trauma has been one of my greatest teachers. I was, not in a literal sense, but in my life, I've been the kid that needs to burn their hand on the stove multiple times. So a lot of what my trauma has taught me, especially the persistent compound microtrauma, is my perception can be off. The way that I perceive situations and how deeply I'm affected by them can be off, and it's not necessarily the reality of the situation, which is very liberating when I can take accountability for my own part in my trauma. I recognize that's not everybody's experience, and maybe not everybody is there. I can definitely think of certain instances where the individual who experienced trauma literally had no part in it. It just is what happened. But that's not my story, and I can't I can't speak on that. But overall, trauma has taught me how to live a better life. It's taught me to be more compassionate. It's taught me to be more vulnerable. It's taught me to share what I've been through so other people can connect with it and find some healing. I've talked about this concept before. I view that I am a healer, but not in the sense that other people perceive healers as. I heal by sharing my experience, or I heal others by sharing my experience and letting them connect with their own intuitive and innate ability to heal themselves. Any healer out there is really just tapping into your own ability to heal yourself. Most of them either aren't aware or don't want to tell you that you possess the ability to heal yourself without any third party. My thing is just helping you remove obstructions or perceptual difficulties that limit your ability to do so. And with that, I'm going to get off of my soapbox on persistent compound microtrauma, or PCMT, and I'm just going to say I love, respect, and appreciate all of you. Like I said, check out the link in the bottom if you'd like to support me in some way, shape, or form. I love, respect, and appreciate all of you. Love and light. Namaste.